guys. Is that the only game franchise you actually play? It's always Final Fantasy this and Final Fantasy that. You know that series isn't perfect, right?
But of course it is. Each game is revolutionary and completely changes the way we play games. That's why the series has been up and running for so long.
Oh really? Then how do you explain these 3 games?
Well, to be quite honest,
Yeah, what is it?
I've never really played the 13 trilogy.
And you call yourself a Final Fantasy fan?
Wait, I can explain. It's just that those games got such bad press and I never really got around to them. I just decided to play 4, 5, 6, and 7 24 times each.
Look, Mo, if you want me to excuse your dedication to this franchise, I'm gonna need you to review the first 13 game.
Or what?
If you don't, I'll destroy your Final Fantasy game collection and the memories that came with it and make you fuse them together with a dead hero and just to be an asshole. But then, you'll learn your lesson, become caring, and defeat a psychopathic alien baby that wants to blow up the world.
Isn't that the plot to Final Fantasy VII?
No, it's a completely original plot that'll happen to you if you don't review this game.
Yeah, what if I still don't believe you?
In that case, Madame Zornia will curse your family forever.
Oh, okay, fine deal. There's no way I'm taking that risk.
Okay, great. Have fun.
Well, here goes nothing. Final Fantasy XIII is probably the only Final Fantasy game that I was ever really scared to play. Upon release, it received pretty decent reviews, but as the hype wore down, and as Square began giving IGN less and less money, the game's true self was revealed as what is often disputed as the most disappointing Final Fantasy game of all time. With that said, I believe that a history lesson on Final Fantasy XIII's origin would be appropriate. In September of 1986, Square was founded by Masashi Miyamoto in Yokohama, Japan. After producing a whole slew of unsuccessful games released on Nintendo's Famicom, Square found themselves in a terrible situation. As a result of their minimal success, Square was on the verge of bankruptcy, and their next game would either save the company or end the company's short history in gaming. This is when part-time employee Hironobu Sakaguchi approached this difficult challenge with his new game, Final Fantasy, a role-playing game based on rival company Enix's Dragon Quest. As you probably already know, Final Fantasy was a huge success worldwide and only became a larger franchise from the time of its creation, spawning games like Final Fantasy VII, which, by the way guys, is the second best-selling game on the PlayStation. Although its legacy is unequaled, Square, now Square Enix after its merger with its rival company Enix, has been disappointing many fans with its most recent releases. This could be based on a number of things, but it's most widely accepted that when Hironobu Sakaguchi left the company after making Final Fantasy X, Square had taken a turn for the worst, and began creating less interesting games and an overall unsatisfying experience. To make matters even worse for Square, Nobuo Uematsu, their leading composer, also left the company a few years ago, meaning that not only is the original creator who made the game so magical now gone, but so is the composer that made Final Fantasy music so iconic. Final Fantasy XIII was created upon this backdrop in Square's history, a time when Nobuo Uematsu was not gone for good, but had just begun packing his bags. In 2006, Final Fantasy XIII, Final Fantasy Type 0, and Final Fantasy Versus 13, now 15 releasing later this year, were all announced, and interestingly enough, 13 was never meant to have a sequel. But we all know how that turned out. Anyway, after an unprecedented amount of delays and cancellations, gamers finally got their hands on Square's most ambitious title yet, Final Fantasy XIII, in December of 2010. And how was it, do you ask? Well, let's find out. Before I really start picking this game apart, I think it's important to cover what most people hated about this game. It's really linear. This, sadly, can be noticed right away from the opening of the game, which starts how many Final Fantasy games start. A group of leading characters performing an act of defiance in a struggle against evil, with a few tutorials sprinkled in here and there. However, the Hanging Edge, which is the starting area in the game, is basically a straight hallway. Yeah, way to start off well, Square. The biggest problem I have with it is that Square could have easily done better. Just look at the dungeon designs in Final Fantasy VII and VI. There are multiple pathways, secret passages that lead to chests, winding hallways, multiple rooms, and a ton of stuff to do and explore. The only thing Final Fantasy XIII's design has going for it are little obstacles.
Yeah! Yahoo!
once again in a straight line that you can climb over, but it takes no effort, and aside from a few stairs to climb, you aren't doing anything. This is how almost every area plays, and it's just repetitive. On top of that, there's no overworld, which I know hasn't been in a game since the 10th installment, but at least those games had interesting level designs for their areas. 13 doesn't have any of that. Now that we have design out of the way, let's talk a little bit about the story. Yeah, so that story thing in Final Fantasy 13, right? I have no idea what happened. Something about a cocoon, and a pulse, and a lassie, and Sanctum 2? Yeah, okay. Before I really attempt to explain this story, wish me luck, I just want to add that this is the most convoluted, melodramatic, ridiculous, far-fetched story ever. Sure, I've played other Final Fantasy games, and I'm pretty used to this kind of storytelling, but 13 took everything I knew and threw it out the window. With that said, let's delve into what I think maybe possibly happened in this game. So the game starts with Lightning searching for her sister and Zaz searching for his son. They stow away on a train and are transported along with other civilians to the city of Cocoon to be killed in a purge of lassie, who are basically servants of demigods called fal'Cie. When they arrive, a resistance group who is against the Sanctum, which is the governing force in Cocoon, begins to open fire and all hell breaks loose. Blah 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 character development, blah 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 character exposition. Now all the main characters are lassie and are being hunted by the Sanctum. To save themselves, they go out on a mission to kill the Pope and free the world. Don't understand? Yeah, me neither. And you shouldn't really care because no one does. Okay, now that that's over, let's see what other terrible items they could fit into a story that spans 3 discs. This game has no sense of humor. I can account for every other game in this series having some pretty hilarious and memorable moments. Let's take a look. You become a drag queen and get purchased by a gigolo in a whorehouse. Check. An old guy calling me a spoony bard. Check. The list goes on. These games were meant to create moments that we could remember, but all we got with 13 was some boring writing with no sense of humor. So the story was pretty bad, yeah. But what about the characters? The way I see it, Final Fantasy XIII suffers from a problem I like to call character counter development. This is when characters start out pretty cool, but by the end of the game, you wish they were never conceived in the first place. God, where to begin? Well, let's start with Lightning. She follows the emo style of main characters we saw in Final Fantasy VII and VIII. You know, characters that start out as assholes, but develop into caring people. Lightning's problem, however, is that she is always an asshole. Next, we have Vanille, who I wish would just shut up. There's Hope, whose character design is just as stupid as his name. Snow, the one we're supposed to like. Zaz, the only one I liked, and Sarah, the damsel in distress. As you can see, the lineup is pretty bad. But nothing, and I mean nothing, is as forced and outright stupid as the love story between Snow and Sarah. It never got my attention, and it feels so forced, like it has to be there. Sure, it has ties to the plot, but as we all know, the plot is a piece of shit. Also, Snow is obsessed with being a hero, and that makes us hate him even more, because he becomes unrelatable. Just look at this.
What's to dread? PsyCom's nothing but a whole bunch of bluster and bullying. They've got nothing on Nora.
Well, we are the heroes after all.
Let's prove it!
Yeah!
These people need heroes. Here. You keep your cool, and they will too. You got it?
Got it.
That was just stupid. They were making war seem like fun when it's not. That was a mockery of suffering, and it baffles me that Final Fantasy II was able to get the tone of war down correctly, even though it was released on the Famicom nearly 25 years ago. There are a couple things to like about the characters, though. First, the voice acting.
They conjured up the courage to eliminate a threat.
Sorry, what did you say? Performances were really well done. People chosen for the roles, however stupid they were, owned their characters and familiar voices are included, like Troy Baker as Snow. Another thing to look forward to with this game is the production value and design that was put into the game. FMV cutscenes look gorgeous, textures are sharp, character models are realistic, and it all adds up to make Final Fantasy XIII the most visually impressive game released at its time. This is nothing new to the series, however. Final Fantasy has always been pushing the hardware limitations ever since its releases on the Super Nintendo, with detailed pixel art and some of the most advanced sprite animations we have ever seen. Characters back then had been classically designed with disproportionate bodies, and heads that were bigger than their bodies. But we have recently seen a turn for the more realistic, albeit ridiculous, ever since Final Fantasy VIII actually.
She left me.
Oh man, I'm sorry, bud. Is there anything I can do? A huge thing that becomes glaringly obvious as you progress through this linear endeavor is that this battle system is either way too complex for its own good, or it's super simple and doesn't make any sense, and sometimes you're not even playing the game is playing itself. The system starts off pretty simple, using basic attack commands and techniques seen throughout the series. As you progress, however, the game continues to shit out tutorials after 8 hours of gameplay. Fighting gets really weird. I feel like I should take more time to talk about the battle mechanics, but the depth is insane, and if you truly decide to play this game, the tutorials will have no problem explaining to you how to do so. To be quite frank, it's actually not that bad. It's just disappointing to find another tutorial when you think you already know how to play the game. After battles are won, you're rated out of 5 stars, and the reward count is based on how well you did. If you lose, the game doesn't punish you. Instead, it sends you to the spot right before the battle began. Oh yeah, and the traditional fanfare that we've seen for just about 12 installments has been completely done away with this game. Wait, what? You can't do that! Every game is special because it has the old fanfare with a new rendition. It bothers me too much as a fan that it wasn't in this game, and I'm sure it bothered a lot of other fans too. Speaking of music, Final Fantasy music is some of the best in gaming, if not in all media. I've already covered this for the most part, but the tracks these games produce are memorable and can elicit all kinds of emotions in the player. As I mentioned before, Nobuo Uematsu was the main force that created these amazing tracks. However, his direction was rarely seen in Final Fantasy XIII. As a result, the music is okay to say the least. There's nothing interesting about the soundtrack here. All the songs almost sound the same and they don't convey the correct emotions when they need to. I even started to notice some of the same songs being reworked into higher and lower octaves and tempos. If you're looking for a good soundtrack, Final Fantasy XIII is not your game. In the end, guys, the main problem I had with Final Fantasy XIII is that I just wish it didn't have the title Final Fantasy in it. Although I had a pretty decent time with it compared to, say, Superman 64, the game's subpar music, gameplay, and story just didn't add up, and Final Fantasy is a pretty difficult name to bear. Other games in the series do so much of a better job to convey what a Final Fantasy game is. So, in the end, I can only recommend this game to the hardest core of JRPG fans or Final Fantasy fans. Anyone else, if you've only played Final Fantasy VI, VII, or even if you've never played a Final Fantasy game at all, this game is not good, and it's not for you either. On the bright side, I did beat the game, so that's good, right?
Yep. Well, now your dignity as a Final Fantasy fan will be safe.
As if it was at risk in the first place. You just wanted me to suffer through this game.
Whatever, man. Well, you're done playing the game, now what do you want to do?
Hard to say, but I'm kind of in the mood for a top 10.
What kind of top 10 are you thinking?
Super!